The lock clicked, but it wasn't me. It was them again. My heart sank. A familiar, bitter taste in my mouth, a taste I'd come to know intimately over the years. For so long I'd been trying to build a life, a sanctuary, a place where I could breathe, a space that was truly mine. But they saw it as an open door, an invitation to invade, to rearrange, to scrutinize every corner of my existence. That day, staring at the slightly ajar door, the one I had just locked before leaving for work, I knew, this was it. This was the final, undeniable straw. My parents kept breaking into my apartment, a violation that had become a twisted, agonizing ritual, and in that moment, something inside me broke, and then, something else hardened. I decided, right then and there, I was going to disappear. I would move without telling them, without a single whisper of my plans, and I would block their calls. This wasn't just about privacy, it was about survival. It was about reclaiming the very essence of myself. Where are you watching from today, my dear friends? Please let me know in the comments below, and if you find solace in these stories of resilience, take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. It truly helps this channel grow, and it means the world to me. My childhood wasn't overtly traumatic in the way many stories on this channel are. There was no physical abuse, no starvation, no outright neglect. Instead, it was a slow, insidious erosion of self, a constant, suffocating presence that left me gasping for air even when the windows were wide open. My parents, you see, were concerned. Always concerned. Every scraped knee, every slightly lower grade, every friend they didn't immediately approve of, became a national crisis. They didn't just hover, they enveloped. From the moment I was born, it felt as though I was an extension of them. A project to be meticulously crafted and controlled. My interests were often dismissed or rerouted to align with their aspirations. My dreams, if they didn't fit their carefully constructed narrative for my future, were gently but firmly dismantled. I remember my first day of kindergarten. Most kids cried because they missed their parents. I cried because my mother stood outside the classroom window, peeking in every 15 minutes, waving frantically as if I were embarking on a voyage across the ocean. By the time I was in middle school, my diary wasn't safe, my phone calls were monitored, my friendships were vetted. If I ever challenged them, even with the most polite, reasoned argument, I was met with a wall of hurt feelings and accusations of being ungrateful, of being a difficult child who didn't appreciate everything they did. And they did do a lot, financially, materially. That was the core of their leverage, wasn't it? The unspoken contract, we provide, you comply. The guilt was a constant companion, a heavy cloak I never quite managed to shed. When I left for college, it was supposed to be my escape. I chose a university 3 states away, a decision that caused weeks of tearful arguments and dramatic pronouncements about how I was abandoning them. But I stood firm, fueled by a desperate longing for independence. For the first few months, it was blissful. I experienced true freedom for the first time. I could eat what I wanted, sleep when I wanted, study what I wanted, and hang out with whom I pleased, without an interrogation waiting for me. But the peace was short-lived. They started showing up unannounced. First, it was a surprise visit on a weekend. Then, a Tuesday afternoon, just to bring me some homemade cookies. Soon, these visits became a weekly occurrence. They'd bypass security, charm their way past dorm staff, and appear at my door, often with a key they'd somehow acquired from the housing office, claiming it was an emergency. My dorm room, my tiny sanctuary, suddenly felt like an extension of their living room. After graduation, I moved into my first apartment, a small, 1-bedroom unit in a bustling city. I was so proud. I bought new furniture, painted the walls a soothing blue, and meticulously arranged my books and art. It was so mine. I made the mistake of giving them a spare key, a gesture of goodwill, a misguided attempt to prove I was mature enough to trust. That was the beginning of the end of my peace. They started checking in. They'd let themselves in while I was at work, tidying up my already clean apartment, leaving notes about my unhealthy eating habits based on the contents of my fridge, or commenting on my choice of decor. That painting is a bit dark, isn't it, dear? Or, you know, your grandmother's lace doilies would look lovely on this table. These were not suggestions, they were pronouncements, thinly veiled criticisms of my autonomy, my taste, my very identity. The sacrifices I made in silence were countless, each one a tiny chip away from my spirit. I learned to keep my apartment meticulously clean, not for myself, but to avoid their critical gaze. I stopped inviting friends over, knowing they might walk in at any moment, embarrassing me with their judgmental stares or intrusive questions. My relationships suffered. Any partner I brought home was subjected to an intense vetting process, often culminating in my parents finding some flaw, some reason why they weren't good enough for their precious daughter. I dated less and less, choosing solitude over the inevitable drama. I chose jobs that offered flexible hours, not because I wanted them but so I could be home when they dropped by unexpectedly, hoping to preempt their intrusions, to prevent them from letting themselves in when I wasn't there. I became an expert at anticipating their moves, at trying to control the uncontrollable, and in doing so I lost control of my own life. The tension built slowly, steadily, like a pressure cooker reaching its boiling point. It wasn't just the physical intrusions, it was the psychological warfare, the subtle comments that showed they knew more than they should. "Oh, you went to that new Italian place last night, didn't you? We saw your car." My car was parked 2 blocks away from the restaurant, in a public parking lot. How could they have seen it? Or, "Your plants look a little dry, dear. We watered them for you." I hadn't asked them to. Ever. I felt a constant knot in my stomach, a pervasive sense of being watched, judged, analyzed. My apartment, which should have been my haven, became a surveillance hub, a place where I was never truly alone. I tried to set boundaries, gently at first. "Mum, Dad, I really appreciate you thinking of me, but I'd prefer if you called before coming over." The response was always the same. A wounded sigh, a pout, a lecture about how they were just trying to help, how I was pushing them away, how ungrateful I was. "We just worry about you, sweetie. You're our only child. Who else will look out for you?" The guilt trip was a masterclass in manipulation, and for years, I fell for it every single time. I'd apologize, promise to be more understanding, and the cycle would repeat. I changed the locks, twice. The first time, they showed up with a locksmith, claiming I must have lost my key, and they were rescuing me. The second time, they simply had a new key. I never found out how. Did they have a spare made from the new lock? Did they bribe the locksmith? The paranoia was suffocating. I started hiding my valuables, not from burglars but from my own parents, because they would borrow things without asking, claiming they needed it more, or that it would be safer with them. My favorite silver necklace, a gift from a dear friend, disappeared after one of their visits. When I asked about it, my mother feigned ignorance, then later claimed she'd safeguarded it, because my apartment wasn't secure enough. The humiliation of having to ask my own mother to return my possessions, and then often being denied, was a pain that cut deeper than any physical wound. It wasn't just about the items. It was about the utter disrespect for my person, my property, my right to exist as an independent adult. The emotional toll was immense. I lived in a constant state of anxiety, always anticipating their next move. My sleep was restless, filled with dreams of locked doors and inescapable rooms. I developed chronic headaches and digestive issues, physical manifestations of the emotional turmoil. The shame of my situation was profound. How could I, a grown woman, a professional, be so utterly controlled by her parents? I felt weak, pathetic, unable to assert myself. Every time they invaded my space, it was a fresh wound, a reminder of my powerlessness. The pain of humiliation was a constant thrum beneath the surface of my daily life. It was the crushing weight of knowing that my own parents saw me not as an individual deserving of respect and privacy, but as an extension of their will, a possession to be managed. It was the deep ache of realizing that their love was conditional, suffocating, and ultimately destructive. I longed for a quiet life, a simple existence where I could make my own choices, mistakes and all, without their ever-present shadow. Then came that day. The day I realized they had once again let themselves into my apartment. I had been so careful. I had a new high-security lock installed, the kind that required a special key from a certified locksmith. I had even installed a discreet camera facing my door, just for peace of mind. And yet, when I returned home, there it was. The subtle misalignment of the rug, the faint scent of my mother's perfume, the slight disarray of a stack of mail I had left on the table, and the camera footage confirmed it. My father, with a key I had never given them, letting himself in, followed by my mother, who proceeded to water my plants and rearrange my kitchen cabinets. They looked so casual, so entitled, as if they owned the place. And in their minds they truly believed they did. Watching that footage, something snapped. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was a cold, clear, unwavering resolve. The tension that had been building for decades finally peaked. Not in an explosion, but in a quiet, definitive implosion of my tolerance. I had tried everything else. Boundaries, tears, arguments, explanations, pleading. Nothing worked. They simply did not care. They would never stop. And so, I decided, I would make them stop. Not with confrontation, for I knew that would only lead to more manipulation and guilt. No, I would make them stop, by removing myself entirely from their sphere of influence. This was not revenge. This was self-preservation. This was my last stand for my own life. The next few weeks were a blur of meticulous, covert planning. Every step was taken in absolute secrecy. I researched new apartments in a different city, several hours away, a city I knew they had no connections to. I secured a new job, citing a need for a fresh start, not mentioning the desperate flight for freedom it truly was. I packed my belongings in small batches, taking them to a storage unit I rented under a different name, telling no one. My friends thought I was just decluttering, preparing for a hypothetical future move. I sold what I didn't need, making sure to use cash whenever possible, leaving no paper trail. I changed my bank accounts, my mailing address, my phone number. Every detail was planned with the precision of a military operation, because I knew, with absolute certainty, that if they caught even a whiff of my intentions, they would stop at nothing to prevent me from leaving. The day of the move was terrifying and exhilarating. I hired movers who didn't know me, paid them up front, and oversaw every box being loaded into the truck. As the last piece of furniture was carried out, I stood in my empty apartment, the silence deafening, a profound sense of liberation washing over me. I left no forwarding address, no note, nothing. Just an empty apartment, a ghost of a life that was now firmly in my past. Before driving away, I returned the key to the landlord, knowing full well that my parents would likely try to get one from him too. But it wouldn't matter anymore. I was gone. My new apartment was modest, but it was mine, truly mine. The first thing I did was change the locks again, but this time, it was a gesture of empowerment, not paranoia. I set up my new life, cautiously at first, always looking over my shoulder, and then, I did the hardest thing I had ever done. I opened my phone, navigated to their contacts, and with a deep, shaky breath, I blocked their numbers. Both of them. The silence that followed was deafening, terrifying, and utterly profoundly peaceful. The initial days were filled with anxiety. Every unknown number made my heart pound. Every knock on the door sent a jolt of fear through me. I imagined them showing up somehow, somewhere, their faces contorted in anger and betrayal. But the calls didn't come through. The knocks were always for someone else. Slowly, gradually, the fear began to recede, replaced by a quiet, burgeoning sense of freedom. I was finally, truly, breathing. There was no grand confrontation, no dramatic showdown. My revenge was simply my existence, my peace, my quiet act of reclaiming myself. The justice wasn't in making them suffer, but in allowing myself to heal. I imagine they tried to contact me, to find me. I imagine the confusion, the anger, the eventual realization that I had severed ties completely. And for a brief moment, a pang of guilt would surface. A lifetime of conditioning, whispering that I was a bad daughter. But then, I would look around my quiet, private space, and the guilt would dissipate, replaced by the fierce conviction that I had done what was necessary for my own survival. Cutting off my parents wasn't about hatred, it was about self-preservation. It was about choosing to live, truly live, for the first time in my life. The lesson I learned was that sometimes, the most profound act of love for oneself is to walk away from those who continuously cause you harm, even if those people are family. Boundaries are not meant to punish, they are meant to protect, and sometimes, the only boundary that works is a complete severance. My life now is not perfect, but it is mine. And that, in itself, is a profound victory. If you found this story resonant, please take a moment to like this video. Your support means the world.